Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Souls Wide Open. I am Justin, and I'm here with my dear friend Alyssa Ball. This podcast is all about getting into love and truth and exploring our soul's desires. And I get to do that today with Alyssa for the first time. I'm pretty excited. We are actually going to dive into vulnerability and intimacy. And we both have been having some really cool conversations in our just like friendship, our personal lives, and we thought it'd be great to come on and talk about them and make them public. Okay, so I want Alyssa to maybe just share a little bit about who she is and what she's up to, just so she can get an intro out there for everybody. And then we'll get started. So, hi, Alyssa.
Hi, Justin. Thank you.
Yeah.
So my name's Alyssa. I am a self-love coach, holistic wellness practitioner, trauma-informed yoga teacher, and intersex activist. And I think that is the beginning of my title and where I come from, but also the birth of this conversation came from Justin and I talking a lot about the vulnerability and intimacy of really exploring being an intersex person and having hard conversations with people. So we are excited to dive into vulnerability.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So, we love starting off with like personal stories and getting into the reality of things, not just having them be concepts, but actually what's going on in our lives. So, Alyssa, I'd love to hear from you what has been going on for you in terms of how you've been really vulnerable lately and some of the results that you've seen in terms of your ability to connect and be more intimate with people. And I know there's actually two different kind of storylines happening here. There's like a more public one and a more very
Mhm.
private one. So, yeah, be my guest. Go ahead and dive in. I'm excited to hear you share about all of it.
Yeah, totally. I'm an intersex person on planet Earth, and I found out that I was intersex when I was 11 and was kind of keeping it to myself until I was about 23 or 24. And not until maybe the last 6 months have I really stepped into speaking about being intersex publicly on social media and getting to do like panels with doctors and beginning to work with different nonprofits. And as I'm trying to put myself out there as an intersex activist, I am realizing that I can't go back and hide this information from people that I'm dating or new friends, new people in my life. And I can't keep it from maybe people in the past that have bullied me or shamed me for it. So now there's this new uncharted territory of even though I might be presenting myself as a really confident and outspoken person on social media, I'm having all these little mini meltdowns and really having to grieve and accept the fact that it's scary to put yourself out there permanently, so to speak.
Okay, very cool. So let me back up just a second. And Alyssa and I met in Maui like 4 years ago, maybe now. Gosh, I don't know, probably 4 years ago. And when I first met Alyssa, she was open about her being intersex with like close friends. Like that was, as far as I could tell, like her comfort level. And so those of us that like she felt trustworthy or trust with would kind of hear that part of her life. And it was all, and it was the first time I'd met someone who was intersex, and so I found that really cool. We talked about it a lot, but like also she wasn't public about it in a big way. And that transition has been so cool to watch you do. And like, oh my gosh, because I remember this hint of shame that would go along with it and like fear of talking about it. And I could see how it kind of kept you back from that big truth in your life. And I think I've even heard you say it was like one of the biggest parts of who you are. So then to hold it back, like how painful that would be. And so, okay, so now you've come out into the world publicly as an intersex person, advocating, educating. There's more intimacy than with the people on a bigger scene and in the world because of that, right? Like, explain how you
Yeah.
feel like intimacy with like the public has transformed through this vulnerability that you've allowed yourself to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's really intimidating and intense, but it's also super powerful to open up that door of communication and being seen with people, because not only have I gotten to educate people about what it is to be intersex, which I guess we could get into for about 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure,
So,
let's.
there's male and female, and anything born in between on the spectrum is considered intersex. And that can be a variety of different genitals, chromosomes, hormones. There's all these different intersex conditions. I have a particular condition that I am born predominantly in a female body with XY chromosomes, and my hormones are how can I say, like, I take hormone replacement therapy, so I just don't have like a full normal quote female cycle. So putting this out there in the world has allowed people like me to find me and my work and work with me and become friends with me, and I think that's really important for the healing journey.
So
Yeah.
your ability to be, what I'm hearing is your ability to be
Hmm.
out in the world and be vulnerable is exposing your true self, is what I'm really hearing.
Yeah.
And actually,
Yeah.
let's just define vulnerability really quick, right? So, like, when I think about myself being vulnerable, it's this moment in which I'm exposing something that's raw. It's like a truth. It's like maybe a personal truth. It's something about myself that I'm very afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of feeling the pain of others not accepting or loving. And yet, there's a willingness to do it because on the other side of it, there's potential to be loved in that place. So, like, you've done
Exactly.
that on a public scene big time. Like, you're being like, yo, this is who I am. I was born this way. I'm embracing it. And not only do I want to embrace it, but I want to educate people and help other people that have the same situation or something similar also be willing to go be vulnerable so they can be loved in them their authentic selves. And so that's so cool to watch you be vulnerable and not only vulnerable like publicly, but like this is like a real thing. Like you were talking about being bullied, you were talking about all the judgments. And like, okay, so now I want to ask you and transition maybe into the more private realm, which is still an area of growth for you, which is really cool. But how it's even just this podcast, we were talking about how like just even getting this podcast, it's just another form of you asking yourself to become vulnerable in more intimate situations on like a personal one-to-one basis with relationships that you're creating. So I want to hear more about that now. Like, where are you at with transitioning from like just being open with the public, who maybe you don't need that much intimacy with, right? Like, it's
Hmm.
scary, but like, how now are you being vulnerable and what is it creating in terms of intimacy and the capacity for intimacy and like more one-to-one relationships?
Yeah, it's actually really bold to come into these conversations with, I'm attracted to men, women, everything in between, and to assert myself with men and be like, hey, I'm an intersex person. This is what it means. I identify as queer, and this is what that means. And to allow them to see me and actually decide if they want to be in a relationship with me can be so fear inducing and bring about so much shame and insecurity. But through them witnessing me through, that experience and like really bringing myself to that level of intimacy and vulnerability, they can actually love me in
Mm,
this moment as, the actual person that I am. In all of my previous relationships, there was always a hiding of this information for months, or if not ever, and really just trying to pass as, a quote normal woman for the sake of being loved and accepted. So to start bringing these conversations earlier and earlier into my dating experience is anxiety inducing, but it's also really powerful because it allows people to meet the real me sooner, and then we can actually be more intimate and connect on a much deeper level.
okay, that's perfect. I want to have a super deep, long conversation about the different parts of ourselves, but I'll just touch on it briefly, real quick, because what I just heard you say was that you've spent a lot of time in this kind of, I call it the facade, right? It's like this fake layer that we create to protect ourselves that looks really good and that we think is more lovable and that we think is easier for people to accept. And so for you, it sounds like that was like holding back this part of yourself in your relationships, even the ones that were the most intimate, that you would want to be loved as you truly were, but like allowing for yourself to hide behind this falsity and then slowly peeling back the layers. But instead, now it's like, okay, no, I'm removing this facade and letting my true self be seen. But in that, there's actually like this kind of space of wounds between those two places, right? Like we have our facade layer to protect us from getting hurt. And
Hmm.
our true self is underneath all of that. But when you removed your facade layer, when you removed this kind of like pretend of who you were and not being honest and hiding, you opened yourself up to feeling some pretty serious wounds. Do you mind actually sharing the specifics? Because I love this is where I love getting like really personal and really exposing like some serious stuff. I know a little bit about you and the specifics of
Hmm.
kind of one of the wounds you have about this. And I think that it'll help people like really identify with like, oh wow, like there's a specific wound for her that like allowing to be vulnerable has then obviously allowed her then to have these other relationships. Do you mind? I think you know what I'm talking about. Do you mind getting into that?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, there's like two big ones for sure. The one that I think you're speaking to is my inability to have children. And I, for the longest time, was afraid of actually releasing that information to people for the fear of being rejected, because I think I derived a lot of my worth in, not, or the lack of worth in not being able to have children, because I think that women are expected to have children. And at the same time, also the fear of being my gender being questioned with being intersex, because it can be this really uh I guess hard conversation, like we've talked about, of what it means to be intersex. And like I keep stating, it's this whole spectrum of different conditions that intersex people can experience, but being bullied a lot for being considered a man, and now in 2022, there's all of this talk about gender identity and being non-binary and queer, and it's a lot more open space in certain circles and certain communities, right? People have a little more open mind and open heart about it. But really bringing myself to have those conversations intimately, to be seen as me, right? Like that's what we keep stressing, is like, love me or hate me, I can't have kids. Love me or hate me, I'm intersex, and this is it. Because that's my true self, right? This is my true self. And when we take off the facade of all the other hats that I've tried to wear in my life to be loved and accepted by people, when we like slowly let all the facade melt away, um, we can be loved as we are. And we have to be willing to remove that facade and look at ourselves in the mirror and really love and show up for that person.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool is really for me when I think about being vulnerable, and I'm seeing this also play out with you, and I think really in any situation, right, is like in order to reveal your true self, you had to go through feeling a lot of, or being at least willing to feel pain, knowing that the potential and the discomfort, for example, being rejected because of this thing that you were so afraid of experiencing, which was like, and like coming up to a man, right, and saying, hey, like, I'm into you, like, let's date. By the way, I can't have kids. The potential for you to get rejected and turned down if that was something he really desired is so high. Like, no wonder you
Hmm.
created a facade and wouldn't be honest. But look at also then how much of yourself you're hiding, how much of your truth. And so, vulnerability for me is like you get to finally be your real self, but you also have to be willing to go through the discomfort and feel potential pain when you become vulnerable. But you get to be your true self. Do you have anything you want to add to that really quick? I have another thought, but like anything else real quick from you?
No, keep
Okay.
going.
So the other thought I had about this is that when I'm vulnerable and I'm willing to expose my true self, finally let go of my facade, and I've been really good at having a really nice facade most of my life. Like I I mastered that because I wanted to be loved really bad. I think some people, they're like a little more rebellious and they maybe kind of find other ways to like go about life, not necessarily receiving or like trying to like grab on and hold on to love. For me, it was like the opposite. I was like, tell me what you need to me to do. Tell me what you need me to be, and I will be that. I will transform however I need to in order to be loved. Like that's how my little girl self dealt with the lack of love that she was experiencing. So for me, it's like, ooh, I need to start pulling back those layers, which I've done a lot. Thank goodness. I'm totally way more okay with my true self than I used to be. But really, it came down to being willing to be vulnerable, feel the pain that I have, and then also not like make the world responsible for those things. Like this is the other part that I'm finding really fascinating with being vulnerable is owning the discomfort that comes up from my vulnerability. So like, okay, for example, so I do you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, yeah, she's not your head.
Totally.
Okay, yeah, totally. So um, I'm in this really, really wonderful relationship experiment thing that I'm doing with this new guy, which is really fun. He's really, really wonderful. And we've both really set up our engagement together, our relationship on being super open and vulnerable. Now, we've created a ton of intimacy because of that. And it's like such a safe place to do that. But I'm constantly coming to him with like my wounds or things I'm working on. And I'm sharing them so that we can create intimacy and understanding with each other. But what I'm not doing is asking him to protect me from them, right? I'm not asking him to like help me out of them. I'm then taking it on myself to go deal with the pain and the wounds. So in Alyssa's situation, it's like I know Alyssa is is working through the wound of being rejected by a man, right? Okay, tell me about that. I
Constantly.
don't want to put words in your mouth because I know you've got a lot to say. So go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful that you introduced me to the concept of like leaning into these really sticky emotions before it's even like made manifest, I guess. So I will imagine the situation of this person rejecting me before it may or may not even happen and really allow myself to like cry and throw a party, like pity party of what would happen if they rejected me. And I have been rejected by men before for this. I have been told, "Oh, I'm sorry, I do want to have my own children." So to actually like go through that grieving process, that's the real spiritual work that we like talk about all the time, is to actually allow yourself to feel the totality of that pain, so that way you can allow the true self to emerge and feel fully capable of recovering or to be really resilient of that vulnerable experience.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. Okay, now we got to be careful because we could talk about emotional processing of wounds for like probably hours, and maybe we will. Actually, we've already talked about talking about talk about um having a conversation about belief systems and how we are gonna, yeah, we're gonna actually have another episode here coming up about the truths that live inside of us and the wounds and how to work through those. But I do know what you're talking about in terms of allowing yourself to grieve instead of avoid the feelings that come up in this hurt self, in this part of us that is wounded. And how if we aren't willing to go into some of that pain to heal it, right? The end goal is to release it and heal it. If we aren't willing to go feel that pain, we're going to stay in our facade. We're going to stay in our fake self. We're going to not be loved for who we are because we're not showing up who we really are. And we'll have maybe even created what looks like a really nice relationship, but it'll be based in so much fakeness that deep down we'll be yearning so deeply for some kind of actual connection that like any nothing will feel truly loving, truly intimate, truly connected. So it'll feel empty. Like we'll still feel very alone. And I think this is one of the fascinating things is that like we can create a part of ourselves or like step out into the world, as you said earlier, wearing hats that make us look a certain way and act a certain way. And we can receive what we think is love in that way and create a relationship. But because there's no real truth in it, we have no actual intimacy either. And it takes the willingness to step out of those pretend us's, pretend who we are,
Hmm.
and actually go into being willing to feel our wounds. And in that place, like then we're opening ourselves to all kinds of love. And what's really cool is that I have noticed, and I know I talked about this in our love episode, is that when I actually am my true vulnerable self, it's so messy and it's like, ugh, it's kind of cringeworthy. But I also am embraced by the ones that really love me the most in that moment. And like, oh man, that's the true intimacy right there. The relationship that I'm in right now, one of the big areas that I'm being challenged is um he's he's been really clear with me about like, hey, tell me what you need. Tell me like how, like, what are your needs? What are your wants? What are your desires? Like, communicate those to me. Be it, hey, I want to hang out, or like, hey, I need this in my life, or and it's fascinating because I, my facade, my fake self, wants to not have any needs, wants to be like totally self-sufficient, totally fine, and give the man full permission to just like go live his life. Don't worry, you won't need me. I can take care of myself and you, by the way. And like, don't worry about it. Like, I'm good. So I've been having to step into a vulnerable place of actually looking at, what do I want? What do I need? Then asking him for it, like actually like verbalizing, hey, like I would like to see you, or like, hey, I would like to do this, or like, hey, can you show up like this for me? And then can you see the moment of vulnerability? Because I have the potential for being rejected, and I have the potential for looking needy, and I have the potential for being unlovable and it being like really blasted in my face. But yet, like, also, it opens the door for him to show up that way, for him to choose to love me that way, and for us to like have all this great communication and be receptive of each other. And so that for me has been a really beautiful experience because I'm willing to feel the discomfort, and I'm doing the exact same thing you were talking about, Alyssa, too, which is like identifying a need and then like allowing myself to pre-grieve him rejecting
Hmm.
me, like feel the fear of not being heard, feel the fear of being blown off, allow myself to kind of grieve emotionally through that so that I'm not acting in ways to avoid it. Then once I've let that move through me, once I felt the energy pass, going out and actually stepping into the world. And it's amazing how transformed my energy and my ability to like communicate a need and then receive it is once I've grieved through that process. So yeah, we'll definitely have to talk more about moving
Yeah.
energy through
Yeah.
emotions and how our belief systems and all of our wounds really block that stuff. But yeah, I'm really loving seeing how much. And actually, okay, wait, can I ask you a little bit about like your dating situation right now? Because I really like, I know that's a her eyes just got really big.
Yeah.
I want to know, I really want to, because I know that like it's because this is where you have so much vulnerability, and I know that you've done
Hmm.
such a great job of like stepping into that. And the world brings us events and circumstances as like the exact same one that I'm in with this really wonderful human being that I'm just really excited to be with, right? Like I'm so excited to be with him that I'm willing to get vulnerable. I'm willing to feel all of my emotions and things that come up because I like really want to keep experimenting with him and like growing with him. I know that the world is also bringing you some really interesting events because I know you're desiring intimacy as well.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing?
So yeah, totally. So like I said earlier, like I'm super attracted to all genders. So I'm like, wow, women are great. Women are easy. Women are not easy, by the way, but it's easy for me to communicate with women, right? And to tell them my whole life story, and then it's great, right? That this would be a very different conversation if you were a straight white man across from me. Um, so the universe keeps giving me straight men to have this conversation with because it scares me so much because they're like my biggest fear. I'm worried about the rejection of straight men. So I'm like, okay, I gotta have these conversations. And I on dates will be like, oh, do you consider yourself an LGBTQAI plus ally? Have you ever heard of, intersex people? And like it oh, I could just shrink with so much fear. But then before those dates, I'm usually having a good cry about like, you know what, this person's not gonna love me for who I am, and to like allow myself to fully experience that. Um, it ends up making the conversations a little bit easier because then whether they fucking like me or not, I like me. I already felt the fullest expression of that emotion, and I know that, you know, like they say, nothing real can be threatened. So my love for myself and the true intimacy and calling in a partner that is really going to see me and love me for me has, you know, nothing to do about how Joe Schmo takes this fucking conversation, if that makes sense. So reaching that level of intimacy and dating is new to me. This is like a new phenomena over the last year because this used to be a conversation that I've had one other time with my partner of 2 years that I didn't have for 7 months. And it was both of us living under a false self for 7 months, keeping information from each other. So we trapped each other. And true love couldn't grow because we trapped each other under our false selves and that facade. So we both fell in love with a false self and it stopped there. And we tried to make it work. And, you know, maybe he has a different story of how things actually transpired between us. But I would say I fell in love with a false self, couldn't move past it. And I don't ever want to do that to another person. I don't want them to have feelings for me and then me present this information later in a relationship. I'd rather them get it from the beginning. Here's the story, you know, with all of this information present, do you want to pursue this, right? So dating's fun.
Okay, no, I love this. So you went from basically not sharing much of this information to making it very public, and now are putting it on the table first and foremost, like, hey, this is who I am, along with a lot of my wounds. Like, this is such an intimate part of me. I'm willing to share it because I want deeply to be in an actual loving relationship that sees me as my true self. And so I'm going to reveal myself. It sounds like there's still wounds there that you're working through, which I like, yeah, that's how life goes. Takes a while to clean all this stuff up sometimes. And yet you're not willing to sacrifice the intimacy and the connection that would come along from exposing your true self. And I think that that's just so beautiful and such a lesson that's so important for so many of us to understand, is that like our true selves, getting there can be messy and painful and confusing and like feel exactly like what we shouldn't be, especially when we've been trained to be a certain thing. But until we're willing to let go of that facade, pull back our layers, examine our true selves, like accept ourselves for who we are, we're never going to be in truly intimate and loving situations. And so, I don't know, I guess for me, like the biggest lesson here is that there is discomfort in an intimate relationship. There is going to be mess. And even right now, especially if you haven't been taught that your true self is lovable, then you're going to have a lot of
Yeah.
confusion and like chaos in wanting to be your true self and feel lovable. But like until you go through that and let yourself actually grieve it, work through the wounds, you're not going to ever end up in an intimate, truly loving relationship. And you'll be lacking any of the connection that you really want. You won't feel seen. And so yeah, I guess just to really encourage everyone to be willing to pull back their fake selves in the name
Yeah.
of experiencing vulnerability and intimacy and how beautiful that is.
Yeah, and I think like the really comfortable thing whenever you've been in a longer relationship is like, you know, you fart in front of this person and you like can shit with the door open and like you allow those parts of yourself to be seen. That I'm not saying that you have to shit with the door open on the first date, but like almost like emotionally and energetically like bring yourself to the relationship with that vibration of like, you know what, like I'm shitting with the door open and this is me. And can give you anxiety at first, right? But like what a relief to know that like you get that out of the way so that you're not upholding this whole thing for however many months when you start dating somebody of like, oh, like I'm not going to tell them this. That just get it over with. Let the fucking fart out and like let your freak flag fly so that you can actually experience true intimacy.
Okay, I think we can end it right there because that's about right.
Yeah. Yeah.
love it. Okay. Oh my God, Alyssa, thank you so much. I'm gonna leave all of Alyssa's goodies and infos in the notes, but I know we're gonna be having more combos very soon. Pretty excited to see where this podcast goes. Oh, can I just put in a little, what are these things called? Plugs? I guess it's a plug. I've got some workshops coming up for Pacific Northwest people. I've got one in Bingen, Washington, October 6th, one in Bend, November 15th, and then there'll be another one in December in Sandy, Oregon. Basically, I am combining like all my juiciest coaching tools and like information and pulled it into a workshop, which I'm so excited for. We're basically exploring belief systems, a lot about what Alyssa and I just talked about today, and about how when we understand our belief systems, not just intellectually, but like emotionally, we can understand why we create the events and circumstances in our lives, and then also how to transform them and how to work on the levels that are like your whole being, your entire soul, so that you actually can create different patterns and not stay in the same recurring situations. And so yeah, I'm very, very excited. You can check out my website. I've got workshop registration there. And then Alyssa, just really quick, anything else that you're like offering that you just want to make sure people know if they want to connect with you? I know you kind of mentioned at the beginning, but is there anything else? Please
Yeah,
share.
my one-on-one coaching container is like my ish right now because I love dropping in with people one-on-one.
Cool.
Nothing in real life presently. Group things coming January 2023. So
Cool.
yeah. But
Okay.
if you're listening to this, they definitely should go to one of your workshops in real life to get all of those things.
I know
For
they're gonna
sure.
be so fun. So fun. Okay, much love for you, Alyssa. We'll connect soon. Okay. Mwah.
Perfect. Love you.
Love
Thank you.
you. Bye.